Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Your Big Creative Life. I'm happy that you're here. And okay, the sun just kind of came out, broke through right as I said that. It's like the most magical spring day in Charleston. Spring in Charleston, I live in Charleston, South Carolina. Spring is absolute perfection. A lot of people think that summer is the best time of year to come here because of the beach. And yes, the beach is nice, but summer it can be brutal here because of the humidity. It's rough. It's March as I'm recording this, and I went on a walk earlier today and got red faced and sweaty from a 20-minute walk. Anyways, yeah, it's just really nice. Okay, let's buckle down. Let's get focused, Katie, because we're talking about roadblocks to telling a good story. There are a lot of things that we could cover under this umbrella topic of roadblocks because there are a lot of things that can sort of stand in the way, whether they're mindset related on you, the writer, or more craft focused things that will kind of like prevent the reader from getting immersed in your world, your story, your characters, etc. So we're going to talk about a few things in this episode, but this is obviously not a comprehensive list. These are just things that I've been thinking about, things that I've definitely noticed. Okay, so the first roadblock that we have, okay, what's in your head is not coming out onto the page. It's not being translated. This is something that I found so frustrating when I started noticing this when I started writing, because I knew what I wanted to happen. I did not start out writing a novel. When I started writing creatively, I wrote some short stories. And I remember this feeling of frustration that it's like the tone of the story and the tone of the characters just was not quite right. Like I was getting close to it, but it wasn't there. And I just felt frustrated about it. And this is only after I started noticing it, because initially I didn't notice it, because I would read, let's say a short story that I'd written, I would read it and it would match up, I thought, to what I had in my head. And I was like I could picture the characters, I could picture the setting, I could picture the awkwardness that the scene might have, or the fear that the character was feeling in this scene. I could picture all those things so clearly that when I was reading the story, I would put those things in there. I would fill in the gaps because I was already very, very familiar with how it was supposed to look and how it was supposed to come across. So you filling in the gaps can sometimes be a big roadblock, because this is not like, a personal failing. This is just, we can't be objective about our own work. But the more that I started writing and reviewing my own work, I did start to notice that I was doing this, where I was like, I'll give you an example where I wanted a character to, like a mother character. In this one story I wrote, it was about a mother and a daughter. And the daughter was coming to visit for like dinner or something, and it was about all this stuff that happened. And the mother character, I wanted her to come off as like overbearing and also a little bit of a Karen in this interaction that she had at the store when she was trying to return something before she came home for dinner. And I realized that after I sat back and really read it and like kind of thought about it for a while, because I could tell that something wasn't working, I realized that she was not coming across that way at all. She was just coming across as kind of, I don't know, rude in the store and then like passive everywhere else. It just was not working. But initially when I read the story, I projected all of those things that I wanted to happen, that I wanted for her character, onto the page. So this is something that this is why it's kind of important to two things. Important to give yourself some time and some distance, I think, from what you're writing before you dive into editing. You like give yourself some time to kind of step back. And then also why it's important to really read critically and carefully your own work, because this can easily happen. So that's something to watch out for. So again, the way to solve it, I guess, to be more specific and direct about it, is take that time, take that space, be very critical, and look at what's on the page. Don't read so quickly that your brain is just filling in the gaps. And then you can also get outside feedback, outside perspectives on it as well, because that can help. 2, you are so focused on plot that you neglect your characters. This is something that I see pretty frequently when I'm editing client manuscripts, where I can tell that the author has put so much time and energy into the plot, and for good reason, It definitely shows the evidence is there in the story. They've got a solid plot. Everything moves along. There aren't big inconsistencies. It's complicated. But the characters are just flat. The characters don't have much agency. They get kind of swept along. I couldn't tell you really much about their personalities. So the way to fix this is, of course, make sure that you're focusing on your characters. This is something that I talk about a lot, and I believe is crucial in every single genre. I believe this is crucial whether you are writing commercial fiction, which is more generally more plot driven, or very literary fiction, where typically there is a more focus on much more of a focus on characters. It doesn't matter wherever you are in that spectrum, however literary you're writing or your story, whatever genre you're writing in, this is essential, because if you have flat, bland characters, then the book as a whole is probably not going to live up to its potential, just because if all the focus is on the plot, and again, like nothing on characters, the book's just going to be lacking. I mean, that there's just no way around it. So make sure that, yes, you want to figure out your plot and all the complexities and how things fit together and all of that, but you cannot neglect your characters, okay? Can't. The next roadblock is trying to emulate someone else. This is actually something that I think a lot of new writers are very aware of, trying to be mindful of not just being like, okay, I want to be the next Lee Bardugo and write exactly like her. Like people are aware of that. And I even have some clients that I work with, some writers that I know, who do not read at all in their genre when they are writing their first draft, just so that they don't unintentionally copy someone else's ideas, someone else's writing style, etc., which makes total sense. I get that. You can decide for yourself if that's something that you want to do or not, but that can be a way to prevent yourself from sort of mirroring someone else's prose or their plot or something without really realizing it. So instead of thinking about becoming the next so-and-so, or, this can be tricky if you have an intention of querying to try to find an agent, to try to go down the road of traditional publishing, because one of the things that you usually include in a query letter are like two comparable titles where you say, this book will appeal to fans of this other book or this other book. But even in that, you're not saying that I'm the next so-and-so or this is this book. It's just, hey, readers who find these books interesting and, who pick these up in a bookstore probably will also find mine appealing. That's all that is. So, and it can be really hard, especially if you were someone who gets inspired by other writers. I know I certainly do. I think about like authors who have written a lot of successful, good, complicated, psychological thrillers, for example. And I admire them so much, but I use them as inspiration in the sense of like, I really like their career and the kinds of books that they're writing, not inspiration in let me copy their writing and try to emulate that. You're going to have your own writing style. Just because it's you are going to have your own life experiences that you draw from and maybe infuse into your book. That's all personal. So that can be a roadblock if you are trying to like copy and paste someone else's book or style or voice onto your manuscript. So make sure you're not doing that intentionally, or I guess unintentionally. The last thing that we're going to talk about in this episode, again, there are so many things that can be roadblocks, but the last thing I want to talk about is just that the plot points in your story aren't connected, they're just random. So if you think about plot points in a story, there are a lot of different outlining methods and story methods of dissecting the building blocks of novels, of fiction. So this can be something that, if you are really into this and you want to read like Save the Cat or take a class or something to understand this, that's fine. But even if you don't do that, you still need to kind of think about how all of these plot points are connected. Sometimes when I am editing a manuscript by a newer writer, there are scenes or moments in the manuscript where it's like the purpose of those scenes or moments is just not clear. And every scene that you have, every plot point needs to serve a purpose and build upon the previous one. Now, when I say serve a purpose, I don't mean like plot related. Always. A lot of times, yes, but it's not it's not a case where every single scene has to be action packed and move the story forward. Sometimes the purpose of a scene, like let's say you're writing a novel, a fantasy novel, and your main character has been on this quest to do something related to like magic, I don't know. And they have a scene where they're just like, they're traveling to this different kingdom. They have a scene where they're in the cave sleeping for the night and they're just like processing what happened. That scene isn't technically moving the plot forward in that nothing happens, but it's essential from a character development perspective. You have to give the character room to breathe. You have to give the character time to process, and for the reader to understand what's going on with them internally. Like, how are they feeling about everything that just happened that day or those chapters, So purpose doesn't always have to mean plot, but what we don't want to do is just kind of throw like loosely connected random things that happen because they might be fun into the story. If you think about plot points and how they're connected, and you're stuck in brainstorming and trying to figure out what your plot points are going to be, think about this question, or think about it, phrasing it this way when you're coming up with these plot points. Because of this thing happens, and because of this thing happens. So because I was running late for my job this morning, I didn't have time to stop at, my usual coffee shop. And because I didn't have time to stop, I was sleepy, I was caffeine deprived, and then I got in an accident. And because of that, I was even more late to work. And because of that, I had a meeting with my boss that got pushed. And you know what I mean? Like, thinking about it like that. Not that you have to outline every single step like that, but that's just an example of how all these events are building upon each other. So if you can answer that question, or like, not question, I keep wanting to call it a question, but it's not. Because of this thing happens. Because of this thing happens. And think about it as like all of these plot points as building blocks of the story, and all of the scenes that you have as building blocks of the foundation of your story. So yeah, just be mindful of that. And it might be the case, like if you're listening to this and you're mid-draft, or kind of in the writing process somewhere, and you're not really sure if these are essential building blocks and if you're doing this accurately, it might be a case where you just have to finish your draft, and then you can go back in the editing phase and look at it from a bird's eye perspective to see, okay, are all of these things sort of building upon each other in some way? Yeah, so that can be something that's good to do in editing if you are like already well into the writing process and you are not someone who outlines and identifies all these things ahead of time, which is fine. Don't have to be someone who does an outline and figures all this out ahead of time. But if you are more of a pantser and you just kind of write as you go and discover the story, then it might be essential for you to go back and just make sure that everything you put into the book needs to be there and serves a purpose, whether related to the plot or, character development or something like that. So okay, so take a look at all of these things, kind of check with yourself about them. I guess one other thing that I'll mention that we didn't talk about is just the mindset piece of it. Like, sometimes the roadblock to telling a good story is you, like you getting in your own way, you being afraid to sit down to write because you fear that it's not going to be any good. So that's definitely something that can happen, but they're just from a craft perspective, these are things that you should watch out for. And they're going to be easier to identify the more that you do this. That's just the thing. Like I mentioned in my own experience, that first short story that I wrote, I didn't have the skill or the ability to be able to see that what was on the page was not really strong. I was just projecting all these things onto it. So, this is something that you'll be able to do the more that you write, the more that you practice. You're just going to get better at doing these things. So all right, well, thank you for listening. I very much appreciate you. And just a reminder, if you are finding the episodes helpful, if you're enjoying the content, it would mean the world to me if you take a screenshot of any episode that resonates with you and share it to your Instagram stories and tag me at the Katie Wolf. Or if you haven't reviewed the podcast yet, you can do that on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And what's cool about Spotify is you don't have to like write a review. You can just press the stars to give it a rating. So it's a little easier. Okay, well, thank you for listening again, and I will see you all next week.